Just 100 years earlier, the printing press had been a simple, hand-operated contrivance. In 1 century, it had developed into a large and complicated machine. Through the years following, improvements came rapidly, and today the printing industry is highly organized, with scores of specialized jobs.
Our news and entertainment media is so much more than merely politically biased. It's evolved into the single greatest threat to our culture, security, and way of life. After decades of acquisition, infiltration, and subversion, the media in the Western world now functions as the tip of the spear wielded by our kakistocratic oligarchy, their most potent weapon with which to reshape the world in their own image. An institution intended to be a means of objectively educating and informing the public, it now acts as a tool for a handful of banking families and their vassals to attractively brand themselves, their corporate entities, products and services, and most importantly, their ideas, concepts, and worldview in the most positive manner possible, while simultaneously destroying all opposition. A means for molding and shaping the public, the willful shepherding of the public consciousness, with the aim of reshaping cultures and nations. It's no longer an exaggeration to state that the goal here seems to be a literal reprogramming of the individual into a fully domesticated and controllable consumerist entity, one that not only doesn't ask dangerous questions, but has been conditioned and trained to mock, shame, and marginalize those who do.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Those of you sufficiently far down your red pill path certainly know what I'm referring to here. But to anyone that may consider this a bit extreme or conspiratorial, stop and give some concerted thought for a moment to just how absurd it'd be if this weren't the case. Considering that our culture and politics are all downstream from prevailing public opinions, and that public opinions are shaped by mass media more than any other single force, how could anyone assume that the most ambitious and unscrupulous elements in our world wouldn't seek the megaphone that mass media provides by any means necessary? Consider the amount of incentive and motive force felt by these ambitious elements, and compare it to the amount of incentivizing energy felt by those who merely seek to inform people on the day-to-day goings-on of the world around them. Which of these two incentives do you think is the stronger force? Which of these two groups might be more motivated, more organized and well-funded, more purposeful and far-sighted and efficient? It's a delusion to presume that those few honest souls practicing real journalism, looking to inform and educate without any ulterior motive, could retain positions of influence and control in major media institutions over the years, or act as any meaningful checks and balances against intelligence agencies, foreign governments, megacorporations, and the banking families that seem to control all of the above. And before we go any further, I can't dance around addressing the elephant in the room. There's simply no avoiding it on this topic. Though there are countless obscenely well-funded organizations set up to bully, harass, threaten, or sue those who speak openly and honestly on this issue, those seeking to have a well-reasoned adult conversation, it's time that we ignore their demands, that we self-censor and commit lies of omission. There's nothing hateful about stating facts, and calmly and reasonably discussing their ramifications for our culture and our nation at large, and nobody has the right to squelch such discussion. What I'm referring to, obviously, is the grossly disproportionate Jewish influence in mass media relative to their representation in the population at large. When an ethnic group that comprises approximately 2% of a nation's population controls virtually all of its news and entertainment across all communication mediums, even if this happened to be completely organic and entirely free of conscious conspiracy, it warrants some serious thought and discussion. Ironically, it's the very people so aggressively pushing the diversity narrative that have studiously cultivated the least diverse and least culturally and racially representative national news media the world has ever seen.
New York Times Magazine of Sunday, July 3, carried an article by Maureen Cleave in which she quotes the Beatles, not by name, as saying, "Show business is an extension of the Jewish religion." Would you mind amplifying that?
I said that to her as well. No comment.
Come on, John. Tell me what you mean.
I mean, you can read into it what you like, it's just a little overstatement.
This matters so deeply because these individuals arise out of a culture so diametrically opposed to the one created and envisioned by our founding fathers. Nearly all of these men were devout believers in Christ and his teachings, whereas the Jewish holy book of the Talmud speaks of Jesus burning in hell for eternity in his own excrement, and speaks of his mother as a whore. Moreover, the leading figures in modern media, almost without exception, seem to view believers as the enemy, and speak of them and their beliefs with mockery and disdain. Our founding fathers cherished personal freedoms, like the right to bear arms, and preached constant vigilance against a corrupt or over-encroaching state, whereas Jewish individuals and groups have been at the forefront of nearly every major movement to disarm or place greater restrictions on the law-abiding gun-owning population.
The enemy is not just the communists, it's also the media.
The media paints the history of American whites as vicious and hateful, neglecting the fact that less than 1% of non-Jewish whites in America own slaves, relative to over 40% of Jewish Americans, and in fact fought hard to end the despicable institution, despite the protests of the profiteers. Our founding fathers and Western culture historically stressed a sense of morals and ethics, championing self-discipline, self-sacrifice, personal responsibility, sexual modesty, and self-control, all of which seems to run directly counter to the culture of Hollywood and New York. When the Talmud speaks of it being acceptable to cheat, harm, or even kill non-Jewish individuals, and that such people are only fit to be slaves, and has the shamelessness and audacity to state that even God himself bends the knee to their holy book, we ignore all of these factual realities at our own peril. These beliefs are part of the character and ethos of those currently shaping the minds of our nation, our children. In short, this seems to be a serious culture clash, and because only one of these two cultures is powerfully represented at the highest levels of influence in our era, this is no longer a fair fight. One culture is being ripped up from its roots and destroyed utterly. The other has attained a level of dominance unrivaled in modern history. This is extremely unpleasant both to voice and, I'm sure, to hear. It's an extremely unpleasant reality. Nevertheless, it's the reality in which we live. We either have the courage to recognize it and fight to improve the situation, or we lazily bury our heads in the sand and take the path of least resistance and allow the problem to fester and selfishly pass it on to future generations, at which point it may be too late. The danger of this situation is compounded by our deep mental conditioning over the decades to view even the slightest criticism of the Jewish people as suspect, as if it can only spring from hatred or ignorance. This programming runs so deep that it caused me to question my own motives for several years, And even to this day, subconscious red flags go off whenever I hear or use the J word. It's also important to state that there are plenty of non-Jews involved. For example, the public face of news and entertainment media is almost never Jewish. The Anderson Coopers, the Lawrence O'Donnells, the Stephen Colberts and Jimmy Kimmels, the actors and actresses in our movies, cable or Netflix TV shows. There's even a handful of prominent non-Jewish writers, directors, and producers. It's just that they're very few and far between. The most reliable estimates show between 75 and 85% of all high-level positions in these industries are currently occupied by individuals of a Jewish background. Ironically, many of these individuals use this information to decry the amount of whites in high-level positions, neglecting to mention that non-Jewish whites are by far the most underrepresented group, relative to their percentage of the national population. The racial monopolization aside, as this is a topic that could spawn an in-depth video of its own, there's also a leftward bias extending across all races and cultures represented in media, of course. But bias is far too soft a word here, and viewing the bias as merely political is too narrow a perspective. What's occurred over the past few decades was no organic drift towards one end of the political spectrum, but something far more profound. As I've mentioned in other videos, the type of cultural change ushered in by the adherents of the Frankfurt School after World War II was no accident. It was laid out clearly beforehand in several books and articles, a willful and well-orchestrated plan to bring about a complete shift in worldview. To turn traditional America, with its nuclear family and Western culture and traditions as its foundation, into something very, very different. Many years ago, I'd have considered these ideas of the media being a relatively monolithic force to be a bit extreme, overly conspiratorial. I even spent a great deal of time seeking to disprove the theories. The more I did so, the deeper I dug, the more obvious it became, and the more I began to see that the situation was much more severe than I could have imagined. Now, in retrospect, and with the ability to look back with far more context, it makes a great deal of sense. To think that those who seek ultimate power at any cost wouldn't recognize the psychological power of the news media, and thus seek to add it to their arsenal of tools at their earliest convenience, strikes me as absurd. These are men who recognize better than anyone the power of perception, of branding. Men instilled with that invaluable recognition shared by all of the most effective manipulators and deceivers throughout history, that one can get away with murder in their personal and professional lives, often for a lifetime at no outward cost, as long as such actions are hidden from the public view, and the image conveyed is instead one of a philanthropist or a paragon of virtue surrounding themselves with a cloak of all the right words and lofty sentiments, aligning with a new moral code developed by the cultural Marxist philosophers and ideologues.
Walk in, go to the Supreme Court. I believe in you, Hillary. I've been to Rwanda. I've been to your hospital in Rwanda. I've seen all the good you've done. I believe in you. Women need you. Minorities need you. I need you. Chicago needs you. We all need you. This country needs you to stand up and walk into the Supreme Court and say one vote equals one vote. What's wrong with that? What's the debate?
I definitely feel his passion. There's other people out here who feel the same way.
A mere 6 corporations now own nearly every last vestige of major media. What's worse, there is little to no daylight between these corporations with regards to their ideologies and worldviews. They're all marching to the beat of a similar drum. And what's more disturbing is the discovery that the heads of these institutions meet regularly behind closed doors with politicians and corporate leaders at events like the Bilderberg Group or the Bohemian Grove gatherings. The future of our world is being increasingly shaped by less and less honest and principled men in more and more secretive conditions. And it should thus come as no surprise that skyrocketing corruption is the inevitable result.
We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications whose directors have attended our meetings and restricted their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government.
An illusory existence is the inevitable result. Having our day-to-day reality dictated for us from on high is the inevitable result. If a major event happens and it isn't covered in the press, it's not a major event. If an exceedingly minor event happens and it's covered in an excited and histrionic manner by the press, it's a truly major event, often with pronounced long-term ramifications to prevailing culture. The power of being able to pick and choose what is a story and what isn't on the world stage can't possibly be overstated. Our nation has been gripped with anti-Russian hysteria since the election, without a single shred of proof of anything nefarious or illegal. Yet the DNC refusing to give their server over to the FBI, and the related Awan Brothers scandal, in which a large number of our senators and representatives seem to have been spied on by foreign nations, or the soft coup attempt against a sitting president by the corrupt FBI, CIA, and foreign intelligence groups, receive virtually no honest attention or in-depth coverage by the press. To give another quick example, a few years ago, a man by the name of George Soros and a few like minds decided to funnel a great deal of money into the manifesting of social and cultural change. Around the same time, although there was no overall increase in white police officer shootings with black victims, the media chose to begin publicizing each and every one of these incidents for months on end, with nearly round-the-clock coverage. Incidents in which a minority officer was involved were ignored, as were incidents in which the victim happened to be Asian, Mexican, or white. The only stories the national news media chose to highlight were those that fit the specific narrative they sought to push. Within mere weeks, millions of Americans were incensed. Riots and near riots were occurring across the nation. 5 officers were gunned down in cold blood in Texas, and an organization called Black Lives Matter was born. Again, although there was no overall increase in the types of incidents relative to the averages over previous decades, because the issue became the primary focus of national media, and because their focus was so biased and emotionally charged, the nation was suddenly on the brink of mass racial violence. And the tactics made use of are brilliantly effective. The Soviet Union used re-education camps and the one-dimensional tactic of drumming facts into the brains of a captive population. With the help of thinkers like Edward Bernays and Gustave Le Bon, the tactics employed in the modern West are far more effective. Democracy provides the illusion of freedom and control. Because our media isn't controlled by the state, we have the illusion of a free press. And finally, taking a page from Stanley Kubrick, they've learned the power of subtlety. Only an amateur propagandist comes out and states their opinion and asks others to adopt it. A skilled propagandist feigns a dispassionate objectivity and dances around the idea they're trying to convey. A CNN anchor might use terms like experts say or anonymous sources tell us, and provide countless suggestive hints and leading questions, allowing the listener or viewer to fill in the obvious blanks. This creates the illusion of independent thinking, of having reached a conclusion on one's own based on the fact picture presented. Such a conclusion is far more powerful and lasting than one forcibly and obviously imposed from the outside. And such is the power of the modern press. Ideas, good or bad, helpful or harmful, now spread like a wildly contagious virus to hundreds of millions within the span of mere days. The public becomes a flock to be herded and managed. The genius of these men is that they've discovered the means to indoctrinate hundreds of millions through the use of a relatively small handful of well-placed men. An efficiency so incredible that it becomes difficult to believe. They do this by playing upon our noble instincts as human beings, and merely setting the stage upon which useful idiots will then clamor for positions as actors and actresses, and in doing so display their moral and ethical virtue to the world. In other words, they manufacture a dishonest foundational premise and then sit back and watch as their puppets build upon that foundation, with the end result being a facade of a structure that captivates much of the world, and one that appears to be a relatively organic happening. One of the most embarrassing examples of this would be the Coney 2012 phenomenon, in which almost overnight, millions of Americans went from complete ignorance to the daily slaughters on the African continent to armchair heroes, donating hundreds of millions to various shady institutions, wearing bracelets, posting hashtags, or remember the anthrax and yellow cake and weapons of mass destruction scares from Iraq, all of which turned out to be brazen lies. The tying of Saddam Hussein to the events of 9/11, or this heart-wrenching testimony, which many Americans claimed had the most profound effect of all with regards to their opinions on whether or not to go into Iraq.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Naira, and I just came out of Kuwait. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
We discovered years later that this girl was acting, a daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador playing a role for the cameras. Complete and total fraud. The greatest power of these manipulators springs in large part from their nature. They are utilitarian. They are chameleons. They aren't bound by any firm codes of ethics or behavior. They present their ends as morally justified and all-important, and use this as cover to pursue any means to those ends, all the while knowing that they control the lens through which we'll view the events. 500,000 human lives were lost in the Iraq War, and 200,000 completely innocent civilians due to our adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. The passive ignorance in our nation has real-world consequences. Consequences I think we rarely stop to consider. The press now plays a leading role in manipulating election outcomes, more aggressively with each passing election cycle. We're all aware of the difference in coverage of Hillary and Trump, and how a nation equally divided along political lines somehow has a national news media in which nary a single individual could be found backing one of the two candidates. But some have already forgotten how Bernie was railroaded, and just how complicit the press was in this crime. Let's go back a bit further to 2012, in which a legitimate grassroots movement had catapulted Ron Paul into winning poll after poll as he spoke to packed and energetic venues, and his competitors were hard-pressed to fill a few hundred seats.
Romney had about 1,000 people in the crowd, making the event look like a total flop.
I guess we had a hard time finding a large enough place to meet, and this certainly is.
Romney's campaign couldn't even fill all the chairs in the audience.
The media sprang into action with a flurry of mocking and demeaning coverage, in which news personalities would laugh derisively at the man, his chances, and his supporters.
Right now, live, right next to the bus behind us, Ron Paul is speaking, and 7 of the candidates are here today. We have live pictures of Ron Paul, but you know what? We're talking about Sarah Palin, we're talking about Rick Perry, the two people not in the race yet, Drew.
And guess what, Paul? If you get video of Sarah Palin or get a soundbite from her, bring that back to us. You can hold the Ron Paul stuff.
To run for president at CPAC, but reaction, not exactly warm and fuzzy.
The winner of this year's CPAC straw poll is now. Okay. Well, the winner of this year's CPAC straw poll is Texas Congressman Ron Paul.
In the end, he was the winner. Probably not the reaction he was hoping for when you name a favorite to run for the White House. Mixed applause and boos as Ron Paul was announced over the weekend. The fiery Texas Republican, no doubt unfazed by the reaction. He's live with me now from Capitol Hill, winner of that straw poll for the second year in a row. How you doing, sir? Congressman
I'm
Ron
doing
Paul.
fine.
Welcome
I'm
back
doing fine,
here.
thank you.
So who was in the audience booing you? Did you get a name on the head? Did you get an ID on those people? In the audience booing you. Did you get a name on the head? During a live introduction to Congressman Ron Paul on Tuesday, America's Newsroom incorrectly aired a clip from the 2010 CPAC event in Washington rather than this year's event. It was clearly a mistake. We used the wrong videotape. There are similarities in the shot between last year's event and this year. 2011, screen left, 2010, screen right. Ron Paul won both years. However, there were audible boos in 2010, while you heard a lot more cheering this year. It's an honest mistake. We apologize for the error, and we look forward to having Representative Paul back on our program very soon.
The winner of the straw poll this year, Congressman
the audience booing you.
Next, they began simply not displaying the polls in which he won or placed second. At times even displaying the poll results with his name missing, as if he wasn't involved in the poll at all.
You know, some Republicans out there have been saying that Ron Paul would be very dangerous for this country because he wants to bring troops like you back from your post from all over the world.
Well, I think it would be even more dangerous to start nitpicking wars with other countries. Someone like Iran, Israel is more than capable of.
All right, we just lost our tech connection, unfortunately, with Dana. Dana, stand by if you can hear me. We're going to get back. You want to go to Kenny Crowley over at Mitt Romney headquarters. People are beginning to fill up that room over there, Kenny.
Finally, the third phase, a complete and total media blackout. They decided to not even mention the man's name.
I mean, if you look, somebody told me, from this last debate, I thought I did rather well. And they went down the number of times they mentioned the other three candidates in the review of the debate. And it was, like 80, 90 times, depending on which it was. I was mentioned one time in all the discussion of the debate after it was over. Right. Now, you might argue I didn't win, or some people argue that I did.
You had the juice.
But I deserve more than one mention on all the stations. Somebody went and added these all up.
Thank you, Congressman.
So what's going on here? You're in this media business. I'd like to know exactly how that comes about.
I had a printout of how many.
It's legitimate. These things are pretty incendiary.
Because of people like you.
No. Come on. Some of the stuff was very incendiary. And, saying that in 1993 the Israelis were responsible for the bombing of the World Trade Center, that kind of stuff. All right. I appreciate your answer. Appreciate your answering the questions, and you understand it's our job to answer.
Thank you.
You don't? Okay. I understand.
The sad reality is this: facts have ceased to matter. The news and entertainment media, when acting as a unified entity, can cause the majority of a nation to believe in virtually anything, no matter how absurd, and they can do so with terrifying efficiency. Again, the reasons for this are fairly straightforward when we stop to give it proper consideration. The world is a sea of nearly infinite information, and we live finite and busy lives. We don't have the time to seek out the factual realities regarding every pressing issue facing humanity. Instead, we trust those who we believe to be experts and specialists to act as screens to help sort and sift this sea of information into readily understandable elements. If the two choices are to buy into the general narratives from the press, or to assume they're essentially working together in a conspiratorial manner and willfully misleading the public, many Americans will still choose the first. Terrified of the shame involved in being a conspiracy theorist, many people refrain from even looking into such topics. A truly free and independent press acts as the backbone and foundation of a healthy nation. No other institution has such powerful tools to encourage justice and champion our most valued virtues and ethics, to expose corruption, to keep politicians honest. We've lost this completely. Our bards have become sick and compromised men. All I've just said may be unsettling and a bit depressing, but there is light on the horizon. I believe the Trump phenomenon has changed everything. The power of truly great propaganda is its creation of an artificial reality that is just similar enough to actual reality that the public is willing to buy into it, and is thus pulled into the story, absorbed into the narrative. The election of Trump threw the media into a panicked frenzy, and caused them to step on the accelerator, to the extent that even the most moderate voters are now recognizing something is very wrong. The press and their handlers and paymasters need Trump out, and a more controlled political entity in to maintain their survival. Yet they risk losing control of the narrative and their role as lead storyteller if they go too far, too fast. And they're now in an ultimately unwinnable situation, with record-low trust ratings from the public, and voters walking away from establishment candidates in droves.
Bonjour, CPAC! Hello, my fellow conservatives! I hope that Americans really like French accents. Okay, and I hope too that you see me as less terrifying than the American media depicts me.
How many refugees has Poland taken?
0.
And you're proud of that?
If you are asking me, if you are asking me about Muslims illegal immigration, none, not even one will come to Poland. Not even one if it's illegal. We took over 2 million Ukrainians who are working, who are peaceful in Poland. We will not receive even one Muslim because this is what we promised.
But I asked not about illegal immigrants, I asked about refugees. And Jean-Claude Juncker, the Commission President, says that you're racist. You sound proud of the fact that you haven't taken any refugees.
Of course, because this is what our people are expecting from our government. That's number one. This is why our government was elected. This is why Poland is so safe. This is the reason why we had not even one terrorist attack. Look at the streets in Poland, and we can be called populists, nationalists, racists. I don't care. I care about my family and about my country.
And I don't think it's fair that you are unbalanced, you are one-sided. You look only at the opinion of those ones who are frustrated because they lost elections. They wanted to fire that government.
Okay,
and that government won. Sorry, that government won the third consecutive election with a constitutional majority. Why don't we respect the decision of the people?
The problem with the EU is it believes in tolerance, diversity and human rights.
But is it your problem or what?
And you are rejecting them all.
But
so
why do
maybe
we do so?
It isn't for you.
Why do you insult a country of
Tolerance,
10 million people?
Diversity and human rights.
Yeah.
Because of the laws you're now introducing. They're not my laws. They're the laws of your government.
But they are not against European values. They are not against the European values. I understand that the liberal mainstream doesn't like our laws. But we have nothing to do with them in this regard because it is the Hungarian voters whose expectations we have to fulfill.
Thank you. Mr. Farage, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. As Mr. Moscovici said at the start of this, the leak of all these papers and lists of people with offshore holdings has come about because of the Society of Investigative Journalists. But what's not been said this morning, and I think is relevant, is that the funding of these investigations came from one George Soros. Now, I say this at a time, I'm going to come back to so what, and it may have some personal interest for you as well. I say this at a time when the use of money and the influence it may have had on the Brexit result or the Trump election has reached a level of virtual hysteria. Just last week, the Electoral Commission in the UK launched an investigation to find out whether the Leave campaign took offshore money or Russian money. This came about as a result of questions asked in the House of Commons by one Ben Bradshaw, somebody linked to an organisation called Open Society. I just wonder, when we're talking about offshore money, when we're talking about political subversion, when we're talking about collusion, I wonder whether we're looking in the wrong place. And I say that because George Soros recently gave Open Society, his organisation, which of course campaigns for free movement of peoples and supports supranational structures like the European Union, he recently gave it $18 billion. And his influence here and in Brussels is truly extraordinary. Open Society boast that they had 42 meetings last year with the European Commission. They've even published a book of reliable friends in the European Parliament, and there are 226 names on that list, including yours, sir. I thought you'd find this interesting. We even had last week Mr. Verhofstadt lobbying on behalf of Mr. Soros at the Conference of Presidents in a battle that is going on with Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. If we're going to have a debate and we're going to talk about full political and financial transparency, well, let's do it. So I should be writing today to all 226 of you, asking some pretty fair questions. Have you ever received funds, directly or indirectly, from Open Society? How many of their events have you attended? Could you please give us a list of the meetings of all the representatives, including George Soros yourself? And I think this Parliament should now set up a special committee to look into all of this. And I say that because I fear we could be looking at the biggest level of international political collusion in history.
There's no doubt in my mind that the old order is crumbling and will crumble, and something new will be built in its place. Which leads me to my final point. The greatest sin of our media wasn't the corruption or indoctrination, or the unconditionally supporting the hands that feed them. It was something much more profound than this, something we need to pull back to see with proper clarity. For decades, the media has been constraining our vision and imagination, imposing a small and petty view of existence and our world at large. A steady diet of fear, of vapid celebrities, of contrived emotion. In a world of iPhone alerts and 24/7 news cycles, these attitudes become all-pervasive. They're shaping humanity as a whole into a far more base, ignoble, and petty version of what we're capable of being. It's independent and critical thinking that leads to the type of creativity and imagination that drives our world forward. And they've purposefully robbed us of this, boxed us in. The psychological reason for the constant drumbeat of fear is to create a feeling of powerlessness in the midst of a dark and dangerous world, dependent upon some big brother force from on high to solve our problems. Illusion on top of illusion on top of illusion. But, at long last, the conditioning is beginning to break. People are waking. Whether it's a matter of months or years, it's now clear that the corrupt edifice that's held such sway over the world at large is being destroyed. We have the opportunity not only to end the political and cultural subjugation, but far more importantly, to break out of the mental prisons that have constrained our view of what's possible. All of this serves to present an incredible opportunity, and one I'd like to leave you thinking about. Destruction may be jarring and disturbing, but it's also a prelude to creation. The simultaneous opening of countless doors with dizzying possibilities and opportunities. It'll be as if a signal being broadcast to create our zombie-like stupor were suddenly cut off, and we consciously awoke to the fact that we've been sleepwalking for decades. And now the world lies stretched before us, containing infinite possibilities, potential, and hope. We'll soon have the chance to create new broadcast signals, saving future generations from the paralyzing effects of the manipulation and deceit we've endured, and replaced instead with healthy and life-affirming content, allowing them to truly chart their own course, unhindered by the ravening wolves that have hijacked so much energy and derailed so many lives. There's still much to be done. Destruction is only the first step, and even this stage is far from complete. But for the first time, I'm seeing a flicker of light on the horizon that I haven't seen before, and one that I wasn't even certain I'd see in my lifetime. If we care deeply enough, and are willing to fight hard enough, that flicker has the potential to blaze with the power of 1,000 suns, with the power to check our free fall into the abyss at long last, and provide us with the solid foundation to begin our ascent once again, onward and upward. Falling is easy. It requires only inattentiveness, and gravity does the rest. Climbing takes work, but all that is truly great and worthwhile is lofty.